Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first quarterly download of 2024. 3 months have gone by in 2024 already. It's an extraordinarily interesting world that we live in. Rod, I just thought this. I would have done a poll asking this question, okay? And maybe people just put in the comment thing, what do you think about Bitcoin? Just put one word in there, okay? But Bitcoin confuses me. I've invested in it. I've read about it. I think I know what it is. I think I know what it's not. And somebody told me that if you offered $100,000 of either Bitcoin or gold to someone who's 25 years old, everybody who's 25 years old would choose $100,000 worth of Bitcoin over gold. Fair enough? And I just would be curious as to what people's thoughts are on it. But next time I'd like to just Rod, let's do that, okay? Just think about what do people think about it. Yeah. I mean, is it something that you should put some money in just in case it goes to $1 million? I've met people who have put a significant amount of their wealth in it. And those are all younger people. And most older people just say, it's garbage, don't trust it, can't understand it, there's nothing there, right? But when you think about, Rod, fiat currency, I wonder if there's anything there anymore, especially when we're just printing money today, right? And so the analogy I use when I'm talking to people about the economy, money, and so on, is if you've got 6 pots of hot coffee, okay, and you pour in 6 cups of hot water, do you have 12 cups of coffee? No. You've got 6 cups of diluted coffee made into 12 cups, right? And when we print money, that's sort of what we do. You can't print gold. You've got to mine it, and it's very hard to mine. And you can't print Bitcoin, right? There's a limited amount of Bitcoin available. That number is finite. At a certain point, it stops, and then there's no more Bitcoin. So as long as people believe Bitcoin has value, I think it does. Prayful, you're on here. I think you might be on the wrong link. You can send him the link to join again. Unless, he's not a guest, is he? No. Yeah, no problem. But yes, we agree, too volatile and things like that. I watch it. It's interesting when Bitcoin goes up. I think I'm smart. When Bitcoin went down to $12,000, I felt really dumb, right? That's actually when I should have been buying it, things like that. Anyways, welcome. We're not talking about Bitcoin today, but it just the topic kind of fascinates me. So we are commercial real estate brokers. You wonder why we keep doing all these webinars, right? But webinars are our business model for communicating with our clients. We think that educating our clients leads to a lot of business for us. We're inking right now 3 listings, and part of that is the market is coming back. But those people come to us because we've been educating them and their children for 10 or 20 years. So we continue to do webinars, sort of always will, right? So here's what we got coming up. And what we're always looking for is gap in the market topics, things that other people aren't talking about. So we're in the middle of a housing crisis right now. It's defined. We want to do a special session on April 9th, just on how do we go about solving this massively complex problem that we have, from financing to GST to office conversions and so on. We're going to have a number of guests on to talk about that. So if you're interested in apartment development, redevelopment, repurposing, and things like that, then that would be something that you want to come to, and it's a free session. We do a lot of work in the Alberta marketplace, and Alberta is, for Canada, I call it a red state. It's like a Republican state. It's kind of like Nebraska or something like that. And the Alberta market is almost like counter-cyclical to Ontario. Right now, people in Alberta are feeling pretty good. Apartment buildings are being built. Population is growing, the economy is strong, and we think Alberta is probably today the best apartment market in Canada. And come and listen why we think it's that. And we work closely with an Alberta broker, Harvey Russell, and so on. Our core business as commercial real estate brokers is selling new apartment buildings. And we want to do a sort of a detailed 2-hour session on restructuring new apartment construction. A number of developers started new apartment construction deals 1 or 2 years ago. A lot has changed. Some of those people need more money. There are good developers there who are willing to give up part of their equity if you will come in and recapitalize the deal, and you'll be getting a better deal than the initial investors in the deal, because now they need money. We have refinanced a number of buildings, restructured the capital stack, after construction has started. I think you'll find it a fascinating conversation. We've got Daryl McCullough on. We've got David Cohen. David Cohen is a lawyer and a mortgage broker. And then once a year we do an annual event, and this is a pretty. It's tied to the Toronto Real Estate Forum. We're the lead sponsor. Informa runs it. It's Tuesday, December 3rd. We're going to have a panel of probably 25 to 30 speakers, a roster of 25 to 30 speakers, talking very specifically on the subject of apartment development and affordable apartment development, and that's at the Toronto Convention Center. Okay, so today really what we're going to do is we're going to talk about apartment transactions, as we always do. I want to talk today about the culture of renting, and there's a particular city in Canada that I think doesn't have the same housing crisis that the rest of us does. And then, so we want to kind of say, okay, what is the housing crisis? Because you're hearing about it a lot. And, we're going to spend 5 seconds talking about that, okay? What we want to talk about is the solution. And this is a multivariate problem. There's a lot of noise around this, okay? And it's not, you don't fix a multivariate problem with one solution. You need multiple solutions. We've come up with what we think is a simple, original idea. And it's certainly not a new idea, but we're recasting the new idea. We want to talk about that to you today, about how your children, create affordable housing in Canada, both for homeowners and for renters. Okay, so this is a chart that we've been doing now for, I think, since interest rates kind of, went up and so on, and we just track the number of apartment transactions in Canada over 3 million on a monthly basis. And what you see is that black line going there is that the number of transactions is clearly down from a high, in September of 21 of like about 80 or 90 or something like that. It's not a perfect straight line, but you can clearly see that there are less transactions. And as you've seen in March 2024, it's 37, 23, 15. Now, that being said, this is a lag indicator. Okay, so by the time a deal goes under contract, by the time you go through due diligence, by the time it closes, I'm going to guess today is probably 6 months. Okay, and part of that reason is because financing is so difficult. So our gut feel is based on the work that we're doing, the inbound calls, the outbound calls, the clients we're meeting, that I'm not saying everything's okay, but I'm saying that we have gone from frozen to starting to thaw out, and there are green shoots. Fair enough. So maybe, and I don't know why it's necessarily that way, maybe people just said, okay, interest rates seem to have stabilized. We believe that there are going to be some rate cuts. So it's almost like you said, okay, we've now accepted where interest rates are. They're not going back down to 1%. Fair enough. And so that will probably result in some repricing, not as much as anybody thought. Apartment values have held, really well. But even when we talk to, so we see it in our business that people are back wanting to business again. Sellers are saying they want to sell. Buyers are saying they want to buy. And we think that, transactions are going to start happening. It's not going maybe back to 80 or 90 per month, but it's probably not going to be, 12, 15, 20 or something like that a month. We expect that number to change just based on the volume that we have. We talk to home builders a lot, and they've had a tough couple of years, but they are also seeing green shoots, saying things like, we've sold more homes in the last 2 months than we sold all last year. Now, last year wasn't a great year, but what I'm saying is, just like apartments, just like things seem to be getting better, but we certainly do live in a volatile world. So today we want to talk about renting, the culture of renting, right? And in Canada and America, it's about the same number, somewhere around 30, 31, 32% of people rent. And then, about 68, 69, 70% of people own homes. And we always feel that, and we're in the rental business, right? We're working in apartment communities and so on. We always feel that rental gets short shrift. Like single family home gets, 10 times the amount of coverage as rental homes do, in normal time, right? But there is a culture of renting, and some people should rent, right? Not everybody can afford a home, but not everybody should afford a home. And the rental market is typically, in normal times, it's dumbbell shaped, okay? It's younger people, they're just starting up, they can't buy a home, they don't want a home, right? They're living their lives, they're transient and so on. And then the other end, of course, is seniors, right? And seniors are living in the big old house, and all of a sudden there's no children there, it gets too much for them and so on. And they certainly not ready for a retirement home, but they want to live in a good, solid building with people like them with big units. Quite frankly, the building right behind me, I just happen to have it in the background, is a building in Ottawa. The average unit size is probably 1,300 square feet, built by a local Ottawa developer, Lapine, and that's his target market. He builds for that senior group. There are other developers in downtown Ottawa who build for the other side of the market, that young, urban, chic, younger person, right? So that's what it looks like. And then in the middle of the dumbbell are people who might want to own a house but can't, right? And so that's the culture of renting. Younger, older, and then there's a sort of a core group of people in the middle, sometimes families, sometimes older, sometimes younger, sometimes people who just can't afford a home or don't want to afford a home. I think there's the belief that every single person wants to own a home, and I don't think that that's true, right? But certainly home ownership is getting more difficult. So when I talk about the culture of renting, there is, and maybe if you just want to guess at it, there's one city in Canada, okay, where renting is quite cultural, quite acceptable. At one time I had said to my wife, we've downsized into a bungalow now. And my preference would have, quite frankly, have been, we should have gone and rented the biggest apartment we could have found, okay? And not had the hassle of the lawn, the snow shoveling, the roof, all the problems that a homeowner has. And one of her comments was, she says, well, people will think we're poor. Like, that's not true, right? Renting is an option, and there are two types of renters. There's the shelter renter, the person who has to rent, and then there is the lifestyle renter, or the choose to rent, or the need to rent, right? So the rental culture is different in different places in the world. And in the city that has I think the very, very interesting culture of renting is Montreal, okay? And I would say the province of Quebec. And look at this incredible stat, because this is leading to what I'm going to talk about is part of our solution, okay? So Rod, point to it with the pointer here. Here are the average rents for Montreal. You see, Montreal is $972. Then you go to Quebec City, then you go to Moncton, and then look at the rent in Toronto and Vancouver. It's almost, well, it's double. It's almost double, right? And so why is that? Montreal is the second largest city in Canada, but it's got the 12th lowest rents, right? And you wouldn't expect that. You'd expect Montreal to have, I would say, the third highest rents in Canada, okay? Well, so that's the orange chart. Now look at the blue chart, or the blue bar graph, okay? And on the right-hand scale, on the vertical scale, is the percentage of small buildings with 3 to 5 units, okay? And this is what's really, really interesting. Montreal has, look at 40% of its rental units are between 3 and 5 units, okay? If we have in Toronto, that's only like 5% of the rental units, less than 5% of the rental units, right? So the conclusion I would draw from this, okay, and it's a simple conclusion, but the data makes you think that, okay, it's that if you have more triplexes, fourplexes, fiveplexes, and so on, that is not the tower in the sky, right? That is lower affordable housing. The culture is to live in that, right? There's nothing wrong with it. You grew up in one, you rent one, your parents are in one, you may own a house and rent upstairs, rent the downstairs, live in the middle or something like that. But I think this data clearly shows that if we build more smaller buildings, okay, and rents have to be cheaper in smaller buildings, it's not a tower in the sky, there's no amenities, there's oftentimes no lobby and things like that, then what you create is affordable rentals. Okay, make sense? Now, let's look at the next graph. We've got that same orange line there, okay, that shows the average rent for Canadian cities. Again, Montreal is the lowest of the major Canadian cities. And on the bar graph now here shows what percentage of people are renters. Okay, now look at Toronto. In Toronto, around 40% of people are renters, right? And in Montreal, 70% of people are renters. Okay, renting is much more affordable in Montreal. Okay. And you could argue there's a different culture and all that. And I get that. Okay. But that's a pretty stark difference of a $900 and $72 average rent and a $1,700 average rent, right? Versus 40% of people rent versus 70% of people rent, right? And people in Montreal are living their life more. Okay. Restaurants are more crowded, right? On a per capita basis, for sure, right? And things like that. So it seems to me from this that if you create affordable rental housing for people, they will rent and they will stay as renters. And most importantly, politically, socially, and economically, rents will stay down. Okay. There's no way logically, if you ask an economist from Europe with no data, which cities in Canada are going to have the highest rent, they're going to say Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. Okay. And clearly Montreal does not have higher rent, right? So there's many factors here, but I think that if Toronto had 40% of its rental units as duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and so on, our rental problem would be less. I don't hear about the housing crisis in Montreal as much as you hear about it in Toronto and Vancouver. Just a very, very interesting piece of information. Okay, Rod? So we have spent way, way, way too long defining the housing crisis. We're not going to spend a lot of time here doing that today. There are scattered committees, reports, government reports, etc., talking about quantifying the problem. We got a problem. We got to talk way more about solving the problem, right? So Rod, let's go to the next slide, right? So there's a link between, society, rent, and affordability, okay? And Rod, let's just go to the side. So as rental demand goes up, right? So the younger generation has, sadly, many people have given up on the dream of home ownership, because I talk to young people about buying a home and they go, what are you talking about? I don't even think that's possible. We're going to show you today that we think it is possible, okay? But because they can't afford home, more are renting, right? So that creates rental supply demand. And also we have an immigration type economy, right? So we have more people coming in. Canada's population just topped out at 40 million, right? Like 40 million people, right? And so that plus there's a lot of the rental supply is not going up. We're not building enough apartments. It's up, but it's nowhere near where it should be, right? The government programs are not coordinated. I'm not talking about that today. I'm not talking about the shortage today, but interest rates, labor costs, and so on has resulted in rent demand going up, rent supply coming down. And what happens when demand goes up and supply comes down? Rental rates are going to go up. It's the free market, right? And it's only the free market that's going to solve the problem, right? So we have a housing crisis. Maybe we have an affordability crisis rather than a housing crisis, because if people had more money, builders would build more homes. Fair enough? So it's not that we can't build the homes. Yeah, there's labor shortages and things like that, but those can all be solved, right? We have a crisis of people not having enough money to afford the housing that's available. So we always talk about, how do we lower the price of housing? Well, Rod is the co-author of the book they're going to talk about in a minute, The Self-Funding House. Rod, you can go next slide. Rod and I turned the problem upside down as sort of part of our solution. So rather than saying, okay, let's take a house and let's eliminate the garage and let's do an 8-foot ceiling and let's put no appliances in there and things like that, we said, what about if we looked at the other end of the telescope and said, let's work on the home, and we're talking about building homes now, right? Let's work on the home buyer's income. Well, how can you work on his income? All you can do is make the house smaller, cheaper, and things like that. We said, no, that sort of, a lot of those factors are fixed. They are what they are. We came up with this concept of the self-funding house. We came up with it about 18 months ago. We've written a book on it. We're now executing on it, and some of our clients are building it. So these are the statistics that we know ad nauseum. We need 3.5 million houses by 2030. Good luck, okay? I don't think 3.5 million houses are going to be built. But an interesting fact is, Rod and I are the end of the baby boom generation, right? When we bought our first houses, okay, it was 2 to 3 times our income. Sarah, what generation are you? You're Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, somewhere around there. But for you, Sarah, when you go to buy a home, it's going to be 10 to 15 times your income. Okay. It's not because we pay you too little. Okay. It's because housing prices have rapidly escalated compared to incomes. Right. And so we've got this serious gap. Okay. And in a way, it's not fair that Rod and I could buy a home at 2 or 3 times our income, and our children, okay, have to pay 10 or 15 times their income. So how do we solve this problem? Because home ownership is the bedrock of citizenship. Now, that's subject to what I said earlier about people renting. There are people who should rent. There are people who can't afford a home, and there are people who don't want to afford a home. But let's say that certainly for young people who are in their late 20s, early 30s, looking at settling down, having a family, and so on, a house is an important part of that process. So we asked ourselves, 2 questions. How do you afford a house in today's market? Okay. So how does a young person afford a house in today's market? Here's our answer. Okay. Our answer is you treat your home as a business by becoming a landlord. Okay. So even a simpler answer, how do my children ever afford a home? The answer is they become landlords. Okay. And you get what we're talking about here. They build a basement apartment. They build a garage apartment. They build a accessory dwelling unit in the backyard, right? And so that's how, and we're going to show you the math in a minute and how dramatically this changes the formula, right? And then how do we create more affordable? So the first question is, how do you afford a house today? Well, you treat your house as a business, okay? And you put in a basement apartment. Let's call it as simple as that. The next question we have as society is, how do we create more affordable rental housing units quickly? They said we need 3.5 million units by 2030, right? There's no way that's going to happen with building single family homes and apartments and condos, right? So a basement apartment would take, in a newly constructed building, it takes, let's say, 5 or 6 months to build a house. You could build that basement for that time period. If you're a homeowner, putting a basement apartment might take you 2 or 3 months. So you can quickly add basement apartments to your house, and it dramatically changes the economics, right? So the other thing that's interesting is that if you think of your house as a business, most businesses, 95% of houses work, right? So your first business almost for sure will work if you treat it as a business by building a basement apartment in, okay? And by the way, I'm saying basement apartment because we're here in Ontario and everybody's got basements. I'd given this speech in California, it would be all about accessory dwelling units and backyard apartments where you drop an apartment into the backyard, and 24,000 people did it last year, okay? All right, good. Okay, so Rod, let's just show the math here. Okay, so let's just say that the average house in Canada, you can see at the bottom there, and this is look, it's not a Toronto number, but if you look at across Canada, the average house in Canada is $750,000. Okay, and so we're saying you can build a house with a basement apartment because the average house in Canada is like 680,000 or something like that, right? It costs 70,000 to build a basement apartment. So if you build a house today at $70,000 with a 20% down payment, at today's interest rates, 5%, something like that, you need a qualifying income of $180,000 per year to buy a house. That's why young people can't buy a house. That's why we have a crisis. And those young people are now forced to rent, taking up rental units that could otherwise go to people who can't afford a home, right? So I was very surprised when we ran the math that that's the income required to buy a basic house. And I'm talking here about, let's say, a 1,500 square foot house with a 750 square foot apartment in the basement. All right. So now let's go to the next picture, Rod, and show what happens here. So let's say right now, in that cost, we've got a basement apartment. If you rent that basement apartment, and in this case here, it's a 750 square foot basement apartment, we're charging $2 per square foot. If the bank recognized that revenue, which they will in the prototype pilots that we're running, your income now goes to $117,000 to afford that exact same house. Now, that's still a pretty big number, right? But look at the difference between $180,000 and $117,000. For the same house to qualify to buy it, as long as you're prepared to do the work or have the business of having a tenant live in the basement. Fair enough? And in our book, The Self-Financial Top, we have a whole chapter on how you select the tenant, things like that, and everything that I'm talking about here, I've done myself, okay? And I've done many times, and I know many people who've done it. So let's go to the next chart. Let's flip it over. And now say you've got a young couple or a young person, and they say, we're going to go and buy that house for $750,000, except we're going to live in the basement. By the way, this isn't your parents' basement apartment with wood paneling. Okay, this is a proper legal basement apartment, 9-foot ceilings, deeper window wells, proper bathroom, washer dryer, properly built. Okay, 2 code legal, right? So now, if you're prepared to do that, especially in your early years, okay, if you can rent that upstairs out, which is 1,500 square feet for $2, okay, $2 per foot, you can now, providing you come with a down payment, you can have an income of $57,000 per year and afford that house. Now look, if you are 35 years old, and that's who we're talking to, but we're talking to the parents also. Had you bought a house when you were 25, you're in the game and you would have ridden this market up, right? So what we're saying to people is the earlier you get in the housing game, in all likelihood, the better it's going to be for you. Just be in the game, okay? And if you don't have $180,000 income, we still think you can be in the game if you think differently and you think of your house as a business, right? And you learn some good landlording skills and things like that. Okay, next one, Rod. Now, the last one is just, you know, if you rent both the upstairs and the downstairs as an investor, so instead of buying a condo, you buy this house, you know, positive cash flow of $1,200 per month, or you're getting something like a 5% return, you know, on your 20% down payment. Plus the 5% is decent enough. Plus the upside in the house that you know in all likelihood is going to happen, right? So Rod and I write this book. We're passionate about it. And I finished writing the book. Rod, next slide. And we go like, why? I'm an apartment guy selling high-rise apartment buildings. Why am I interested in duplexes? Well, because, you know, it wound up being sort of autobiographical for me. When I was 24 years old, for sure it was different times, right? But I was able to buy a regular house and I converted it to a triplex. I call that Young Dare, okay? I lived in the basement, okay? And by the way, it's not the basement apartment the houses we're building today, Rod. This actually had paneling and shed carpet, but it was more than acceptable for where I was in life, okay? And then as I got married, had a family, you know, I kind of moved up to the middle apartment for a while. I lived in apartment number 2 with just my wife. As we had children, we took over 1 and 2. So it's number 1 now and the second one. And then I started a business and my family moved and you know, I put the business in the basement. I had employees coming there and, you know, and so on. And then later on the kids moved out, you know, I could re-rent out the upstairs. And now that my children all moved out again, I could have converted the retired Derek, by the way, which will never happen. Okay. I'm going to be here forever, right? I could have converted the house again, lived in the middle apartment, which was quite nice to live in, and I could have rented out apartment 1 and apartment 3 and had retirement income for the rest of my life. Or when my married children could live there, or one of my grandchildren, when they go to McMaster University, could come and live there, right? So think of the house now as modules, right? Or think about this also. I did sell the house in the end, okay? But had I wish I didn't, because it's such a perfect model of I bought the house and cut it up in 3. I took over, at one point I took over the whole house, and then I converted it back again, right? But the thing was, I didn't have to go through the normal process of buying a small condo, stepping up to a townhouse, stepping up to a house, and then stepping up to my final house, right? I've had 4 transactions. I've upped my family, my roots. I paid land transfer tax. I paid real estate commissions. What we're saying is, with some creative thinking, sometimes help on down payment from your parents or from a professional down payment company, right? We think you can maybe buy your final house now. You just don't live in all of it, okay? As you need the house, you take over. Like at one point, I lived in a house with 3 kitchens and 3 bathrooms. Big deal, right? Big deal. We converted the upstairs kitchen to a nursery, and we used to bathe our youngest in the kitchen sink. And we just used the cabinets as storage, and we took the fridge and the stove out, right? If I'd converted back again, I just would have put the fridge and stove back in again, right? So what we're talking about here is really what the concept that we have called next slide, the self-funding house, right? And we wrote this book thinking that that's all we need to do. Write a book, put it on Amazon, solve the world's problems, right? Well, kind of doesn't go like that. So, but it is on Amazon, by the way. There's probably a QR code somewhere, but just type in the self-funding house and you'll be able to get it. And it's not expensive. There's also, I think, an e-copy you can download or a Kindle copy or something, right? And so it's on there. And then we just written the second book, because the first book is about your mind shift of going from the single house with the white picket fence, you know, et cetera, et cetera. That day is difficult, or that day is gone. The second book is about the blueprint for the self-funding house, everything you need to know to transform your house into a business, including how you build that. In Canada, we call it a basement apartment. Book 3 is on the drawing board still, and that's a book called The Stakeholders of Self-Funding House, and that's for politicians, lenders, municipalities, and the homeowner to think about more of societal issues and why it's important that we solve this housing problem that we have. And this alone doesn't solve the problem, but I think if we embrace this, it could solve 10, 15, 20% of the problem, maybe more. But we attacked it first by saying, how will our children afford a home? And how will we create cheap rental housing quickly without government? Our solution was the self-funding house. So it applies to, many places. It applies to subdivisions being built, like tract housing out in Milton or out in suburban Calgary or wherever, right? It applies to infill housing. So, where you're building 10, 20 homes on an infill lot, right? And then the biggest market is there are 7 million single family homes in Canada, right? All of those are potential candidates for renovation to build what we call the self-funding house. That's what I did when I first started my life. And because I did that conversion, I learned sales, I learned marketing, I learned income tax, and I think I wouldn't be where I am today in life partly because I was able to afford a house, which I couldn't have afforded when I was in my mid-20s, but I could because of the additional income. But it also taught me many business skills that I still use today. So the self-funding house turned into selling 284 units of, $750,000, per unit apartment price. So Rod and I write this book and we say, you know what? This is interesting. We started talking to our clients, and many of our apartment clients also have home building divisions. Sure enough, we ran into a client who said, I like this idea. How do we build a self-funding house? We have clients now who are building these homes and selling them on I call a pre-production franchise prototype basis. Okay. Our clients have built so far, I would say about 30, okay, in multiple provinces across Canada. We're learning, and this is not the same as building a house, and this is not building an apartment, okay? It's a different asset class. Rod and I have decided to call it the self-funding house, but we got to give it maybe a shorter, a plex, right? It's a business where people build and own and manage 2 to 5 units, okay? After 5 units, 6 units, we call that a proper apartment building. That's CMHC's definition. So if you listening here are interested in this business, talk to us. We've got a lot of intel on it. We've got a lot of strategy on it. We've got data on it now. And we would be interested in working with you to roll this out on a prototype basis first. But we're really at the point now where we think that this is going to go to a production standpoint, and this is going to become an asset class that's in demand once people understand it from a home buyer standpoint, once lenders understand it, and once developers understand it. And you can't just look, this isn't a new business. Basement apartments have been around forever. What we've done is we've very much formalized this business. Okay. All right, Rod. So let's go. So what are we trying to solve for here? Right. So why the self-funding house? Well, on the left-hand side is what we've done all our lives, right? Is new construction of large and medium-sized buildings. So let's call it buildings of, I don't know, the smallest we've ever sold probably 20 units, and the largest has been, 1,000 units, right? Or that'd be a fair range. But let's call that medium and large new construction. That is the workhorse. That is the supply of most of the rental housing in Canada, not in Montreal, as I showed you earlier, right? So what we're saying is we got to go full speed ahead as a nation on building large and medium-sized buildings. Those are 100-year buildings and things like that. But the other part of it, okay, Rob, just go to the next slide. But this part of it is slow. This takes a long time. So if you were to buy a piece of land today for a high-rise apartment building, it's probably going to be 10 years before there's rental housing actually available on that site for people in your city, given all the hoops you've got to jump through in terms of zoning and things like that. If you were to build these structures that we're talking about, duplexes, light intensification, gentle density would be the overall buzzword to use here. You're building apartments, you're increasing home ownership and affordable rents, and you're building it very, very quickly. Okay, Rod, come on here. Is there some part that we should be saying here that I haven't said? I mean, Rod's the point man on the self-funding house with the concept. He helped me write the book, and he's working with our clients sort of one-on-one. From a developer standpoint, Rod, what is their hesitation, let's call it, in this idea? Because it's so simple.
Yeah, I think from a developer standpoint, they're coming from a couple of decades of what I call a build it and they will come mentality, meaning that, here in Burlington, where Derek and I are living, if a new subdivision goes up and the new home sale trailer or model opens up, there's a lineup out the door and it just gets sold. They've never had to think about marketing or selling other than just announcing and portraying their strengths of their product that they're delivering. And I think that this, just as someone pivoting from condos to apartment, even though it's building and development, there are differences. There are differences in sales, marketing, mindset. The same thing here. That this is not building a house. This is not just putting up a tract of house when we're talking about new construction. It takes a whole different mindset. So it takes a different sales strategy, a different marketing strategy, and most importantly, we're finding it even takes an after sales strategy, because this isn't a transactional business. You have to support that journey of the buyer through that shift in mindset and actually help them through that process. And I think that's what we love, Derek, about this, is that this has so much of the apartment development mindset and processes in place, but it's a scalable part. And I know, Derek, we landed on this one thing before we even thought it would be a business. And we wrote this series of books on the online portal with one thought in mind and one thought only. And that was, it was simply the right thing to do. We thought it was our contribution to tackling a housing crisis that is much bigger than just apartment development alone. It's a multivariate problem. Derek mentioned that earlier. There's a multitude of solutions needed if we're really going to tackle the problem at heart. So I think we would be remiss to not contribute a strategy that for some of our clients who build apartments but also have a home building division, and many of you have contacts in that space anyways, that we have expertise and ideas and everything else that makes it happen. And so we waited until now to really talk about it, because we wanted the real world examples and pilot projects to come to fruition and prove out and see results and see many major players come on board. I just think we're excited about that. Maybe there is a glimmer of hope for a solution to this housing crisis when you open up the envelope of potential solutions. So those are my thoughts, Derek.
Yeah, no. I think it's a great summary. But what excites me about this is that it's the common man that solves the problem. Okay, we're not looking at the government here. Like, government's an enabler here. In fact, many times they should just get out of the way. Now, Doug Ford, did the right thing. He brought in Bill 23, which allows for gentle density. So you can build now a legal duplex or a legal triplex on a single family lot. And I think many provinces have followed suit, and many states in America have done the same thing. And I think you're going to find that that's going to be the norm now, right? So that was an important part of the piece of the puzzle. Another part is the financing piece to get the rental revenue recognized upfront. But the biggest part is the mind shift of the buyer, the investor, and the developer. Because look, the technology to build a basement apartment hasn't changed in 100 years, right? We had basement apartments 100 years ago. How you build a house actually hasn't changed that much in 100 years. It might with 3D printing and so on. So this really is saying, and look, what was Uber? There were always drivers, there were always cars, there were always taxis, right? They just rethought it, simplified it, and changed the mindset, right? 20 years ago, if somebody jumped in the back seat of my car, I would think I was being mugged. Today, I'd call them a customer, right? So we've shifted our mindset about cars. We've shifted our mindset about Airbnb and hotel. I think that we're on the cusp of shifting our mindset about home ownership and rental housing creation. And I think if we go back to first principles, and bring it down to this simple level of how do young people afford a home today? By becoming a landlord and by owning their own business. And how do we create affordable rental? Is by not just young people, everything is investors, young people, seniors, parents helping their children and things like that. So that is what Rod and I are going to spend a good part of our future doing, is the self-funding house. And if you're interested in this idea philosophically, or if you have a skill set that you want to bring to us, we're happy to work with you and talk to you and share information with you. We see this for sure as a business. Our core business is still apartments. That's what we love to do. This is a bit of our passion project, and it's fully tied to the rental housing business. We're creating rental supply. Okay, Rod, I think that's it. You got me wrap up? Dave Price, our director of sales, he's on here somewhere. If you have any questions about what we do, how we do, and so on, Dave is usually the point person. You're welcome to reach to any of us, but there's this QR code just to book a time to talk to him about anything that we do. Most of our time is spent in doing feasibilities in new apartment construction and transacting on apartment brokerage. But we are fascinated with this idea of solving what seems to be one of the larger problems that's facing our country today. Okay, so that's it, Rod. When's our next session?
July 4th. So save that date. I know Americans July 4th means a big thing. July 1st, our holiday, but we're looking forward for Q2. And maybe there's going to be a little bit of different story as we head into the summer months, as we're hearing about, but we're looking forward to it, Derek.
Yeah. It's certainly a very interesting time. And we hope that whatever thaw that we're seeing sort of continues, and we look forward to reporting back to you again. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rod. Thanks. Okay.